Michael Jenkins carefully examined the cereal boxes on aisle 7 of Thompson's grocery, comparing nutrition labels with the practiced eye of someone who had recently committed to healthier eating habits. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a harsh glow across the nearly empty store at this early morning hour. He'd deliberately chosen to shop when the store first opened, preferring the quiet solitude that allowed him to thoughtfully consider his purchases without feeling rushed. The peaceful morning routine shattered when a broad-shouldered man in a red polo shirt deliberately veered into his personal space, shoulder-checking Michael hard enough to make him stumble. The impact sent the cereal box in Michael's hands clattering to the linoleum floor. Years of experience had taught Michael to recognize the intentional nature of the contact. This was no accident. "Watch where you're going," the man in red snarled, his pale face flushing with manufactured outrage. Though slightly shorter than Michael's 6'1" frame, he attempted to loom, positioning himself aggressively close. Michael took a measured breath, maintaining his composure as he bent to retrieve the fallen cereal box. "No problem, sir. Let's both be more careful." He kept his voice steady and professional, the same tone he used in the architectural firm where he worked as a senior project manager. 20 years of navigating corporate spaces had honed his ability to de-escalate situations like this. The man's eyes narrowed, his lips curling into a sneer. "You people always think you own the place, don't you?" The emphasis he placed on "you people" carried unmistakable venom, transforming two simple words into a weapon designed to wound. "I'm just trying to do my shopping," Michael replied, maintaining eye contact while taking a deliberate step backward. He placed the cereal box back on the shelf, no longer interested in comparing grain contents and sugar levels. His priority now was creating distance between himself and this increasingly hostile stranger. But the man followed, closing the gap Michael had tried to create. "Maybe you should do your shopping somewhere else. This isn't your kind of store." His voice grew louder with each word, drawing the attention of an elderly woman at the end of the aisle, who quickly pushed her cart in the opposite direction. Michael felt his heart rate increasing, but kept his exterior calm. He'd faced this before in school, at work, in restaurants, and now here in this grocery store that he'd been shopping at for the past 5 years. "Sir, I'm going to walk away now. Have a good morning." He turned, preparing to abandon his shopping cart and leave the store entirely. The sound of rapid footsteps behind him was his only warning before a rough hand grabbed his shoulder, spinning him around. "Don't you turn your back on me, boy." The man's face was now inches from Michael's, spittle flying as he spewed a string of racial slurs that seemed to echo through the quiet store. Michael shrugged off the grip, his hands raised in a non-threatening gesture. "Don't put your hands on me. I'm leaving." The words came out firm but controlled, even as adrenaline began coursing through his system. The first push caught him off guard, forcing him back a step. The second push was harder, accompanied by more slurs and accusations. Michael maintained his defensive posture, aware that every movement he made would be scrutinized and judged by others. The weight of this awareness had been ingrained in him since childhood, the understanding that his actions would never be viewed in isolation, but as representative of something larger. When the punch came, it was clumsy but fueled by rage. The man's fist glanced off Michael's forearm as he brought his hands up to protect himself. The impact stung, but years of boxing training at his local gym had taught Michael how to absorb a blow. Time seemed to slow as Michael processed his options. He could see the man winding up for another punch, face contorted with hatred. The decision crystallized in a fraction of a second. He had the right to defend himself, regardless of how society might interpret his actions. As the second punch came, Michael slipped to the side and countered with a single, controlled jab. Years of training guided the motion, allowing him to apply just enough force to stop the attack without causing serious harm. His fist connected with the man's chest, driving him back a step and interrupting his assault. The look of shock that crossed the man's face would have been almost comical in another context. He staggered backward, mouth agape, as if unable to process that his target had dared to defend himself. The expression of disbelief quickly morphed into something darker, more dangerous, the wounded pride of someone whose worldview had just been challenged. Chapter 2. The aftermath. The sound of running footsteps marked the arrival of curious onlookers, drawn by the commotion. The man in red immediately shifted his demeanor, clutching his chest where Michael's defensive strike had landed. His face transformed into a mask of exaggerated pain as he pointed accusingly at Michael. "He attacked me," the man bellowed, his voice cracking with theatrical distress. "I was just shopping, and this thug attacked me." The performance might have been convincing if not for the security cameras mounted in each corner of the aisle, their red lights blinking steadily as they recorded every moment. Michael remained still, hands visible at his sides, acutely aware of how this scene could be misinterpreted. A small crowd had gathered at both ends of the aisle, some with phones raised to record the incident. He could hear the murmur of conversations, the rustle of speculation beginning to spread through the store like a virus. The clicking of heavy boots against linoleum announced the arrival of store security. Two officers approached cautiously, their faces professionally neutral as they assessed the situation. The first officer, whose nameplate read Rodriguez, positioned himself between Michael and his aggressor. "What's going on here?" Rodriguez asked, his eyes scanning both men for weapons or signs of serious injury. His partner, a shorter woman with Chan on her badge, was already speaking into her radio, presumably calling for backup. Before Michael could respond, the man in red launched into a dramatic recounting of events that bore little resemblance to reality. "I was just shopping, minding my own business, when this man attacked me out of nowhere. Look what he did to me." He pulled up his shirt to reveal a reddening mark on his chest. Michael took a deep breath, keeping his voice steady as he addressed Officer Rodriguez. "Sir, I'd like to direct your attention to the security cameras. They'll show this man assaulting me first, following me when I tried to leave, and throwing multiple punches. I defended myself with minimal force when he wouldn't stop." Rodriguez nodded slowly, his expression remaining neutral. "Miss Chun, please review the footage." His partner moved quickly toward the security office, while Rodriguez maintained his position between the two men. The man in red seemed to grow more agitated as the minutes ticked by, his performance becoming increasingly animated. "You just going to let him stand there? He's dangerous. Look what he did to me." He took a step forward, causing Rodriguez to shift his stance slightly. "Sir, please remain where you are," Rodriguez instructed firmly. "We're reviewing the footage now." The crowd had grown larger, with some store employees trying unsuccessfully to direct customers to other aisles. Michael could hear snippets of conversation, some sympathetic, others hostile. He kept his gaze focused straight ahead, maintaining his composed posture despite the growing tension in his shoulders. Officer Chen's voice crackled over Rodriguez's radio. "Camera 3 shows full incident. Subject in red initiated physical contact, pursued when victim attempted to leave, and threw first punch. Victim's response was clearly defensive, the man's face contorted with rage as he heard the radio transmission. In a sudden burst of movement, he lunged past Rodriguez, swinging wildly at Michael. This time, Michael didn't need to defend himself. Rodriguez and two other officers who had just arrived quickly restrained the man, forcing him to the ground as he continued to shout racial epithets and threats. The sound of police sirens filtered through the store's automatic doors as local law enforcement arrived on scene. Michael watched as the man was handcuffed, still struggling and shouting, his face red with exertion and anger. The entire incident had lasted less than 15 minutes, but Michael knew the repercussions would extend far beyond this morning in the grocery store. Chapter 3. Legal process. The fluorescent lights of the police station cast harsh shadows across the incident report form as Michael carefully documented every detail of the morning's events. Officer Sarah Martinez sat across from him, her dark eyes attentive as she asked clarifying questions and noted additional details in her own report. The security footage from Thompson's grocery had already been transferred to the police department systems, providing irrefutable evidence of the unprovoked attack. "Mr. Jenkins," Martinez began, her tone professional but sympathetic. "Based on the evidence we have, including the security footage and multiple witness statements, we'll be charging him with assault, battery, and potential hate crime enhancements. The district attorney's office has already expressed interest in pursuing this case." Michael nodded, signing the final page of his statement. The pen felt heavy in his hand as he considered the path ahead. He'd seen enough cases like this in the news to know that justice wasn't always straightforward, even with clear evidence. The following weeks brought a steady stream of legal proceedings. The aggressor, now identified as James Barrett, had hired a defense attorney known for taking on controversial cases. Michael watched from his seat in the courthouse corridor as Barrett and his lawyer emerged from a preliminary hearing, their faces set in expressions of righteous indignation. Barrett's eyes locked onto Michael, and he took several aggressive steps forward before his attorney grabbed his arm. "This isn't over," Barrett snarled, his face flushing with the same anger that had started the entire incident. "You think you're so smart with your fancy suit and your security tapes, but we'll see who the jury believes." Michael remained seated, maintaining his composure as courthouse security moved to intercept Barrett. The incident only served to strengthen the prosecution's case, with multiple witnesses now able to testify about Barrett's continuing aggressive behavior. The medical examination had documented the bruising on Michael's forearm where he blocked Barrett's punch, as well as finger-shaped bruises on his shoulder from when Barrett had grabbed him. The emergency room doctor, Dr. Sarah Chun, had photographed each injury methodically, her gentle efficiency accompanied by quiet words of support. "These images tell a clear story," she had said, carefully applying antiseptic to a small abrasion. "The defensive nature of your injuries is consistent with your account and the security footage. I'll make sure that's clearly noted in my report." As the case progressed, more witnesses from the store came forward. The elderly woman who had fled the aisle early in the confrontation provided a written statement describing Barrett's aggressive behavior. A young stock clerk who had been restocking shelves nearby gave a detailed account of hearing Barrett's racial slurs and watching him pursue Michael despite attempts to de-escalate. The prosecutor, Angela Washington, met with Michael several times to prepare for trial. Her office walls were lined with law books and framed diplomas, but what caught Michael's attention was a small plaque bearing a quote from Thurgood Marshall. "In recognizing the humanity of our fellow beings, we pay ourselves the highest tribute." "Mr. Jenkins," Washington said during one of their meetings, "this case is important not just for you, but for our community. The evidence is clear, and Mr. Barrett's continued aggressive behavior shows a pattern that needs to be addressed. But I want you to be prepared. Trials like this can be emotionally challenging." Michael appreciated her directness. "I understand. This isn't just about me anymore. It's about making sure people know they can't act this way without consequences." The day Barrett pleaded not guilty despite the overwhelming evidence, Michael sat in the courtroom gallery, watching the proceedings with a sense of resigned determination. He'd expected this, knowing that people like Barrett often refuse to acknowledge the reality of their actions, preferring to maintain their distorted worldview even in the face of clear evidence. Chapter 4. The trial. The courthouse stood as a monument to justice, its marble columns reaching skyward as Michael climbed the steps on the first day of trial. Inside, courtroom 3B hummed with quiet activity as lawyers arranged documents and court officers directed people to their seats. Michael straightened his tie, a habit born of nervousness, as he took his place behind the prosecution's table. Angela Washington's opening statement cut through the murmured conversations like a laser, her voice clear and confident as she addressed the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about more than a single incident in a grocery store. It's about the right of every person to go about their daily life without fear of harassment or assault. The evidence will show that Mr. Barrett not only initiated a physical confrontation with Mr. Jenkins, but did so with clear racial animus." She proceeded to outline the sequence of events, her words painting a vivid picture supported by the security footage that would soon be shown. Michael watched the jurors' faces as they absorbed the information, noting their reactions as Washington described Barrett's increasingly aggressive behavior. The defense's opening statement attempted to spin a narrative of misunderstanding and self-defense, claiming that Michael had somehow provoked the incident. The argument felt hollow, especially when contrasted with the clear video evidence that followed. The security footage played on multiple screens throughout the courtroom, the silent drama unfolding in high definition. Michael watched himself on screen, reliving each moment from a different perspective. The footage clearly showed Barrett's deliberate collision, the pursuing harassment, and the eventual assault. Several jurors visibly reacted when Barrett threw the first punch, and again when they saw Michael's controlled defensive response. Witness after witness took the stand, each account adding another layer to the prosecution's case. The elderly woman who had fled the scene, Mrs. Eleanor Thompson, spoke with quiet dignity about the fear she'd felt watching Barrett's aggressive behavior. "I've lived in this community for 60 years, she testified, her voice wavering slightly. "I've never seen such naked hatred in someone's eyes." The store security officers provided professional, detailed testimony about their response and the immediate review of the security footage. Officer Rodriguez's testimony was particularly damaging to the defense, as he described Barrett's attempt to attack Michael again in front of law enforcement. Dr. Chen's medical testimony included detailed photographs and documentation of Michael's injuries, along with expert analysis of their defensive nature. Her clinical description left no doubt about the sequence of events that had caused each injury. When Barrett took the stand in his own defense, his testimony was a study in contradiction and barely contained anger. He attempted to present himself as the victim, but his facade cracked under Washington's skillful cross-examination. "Mr. Barrett," Washington began, her tone measured, "the security footage shows you following Mr. Jenkins after he attempted to leave the situation. Why did you pursue him?" Barrett's face flushed as he struggled to provide a reasonable explanation. He was being disrespectful. "These people need to learn their place, he caught himself, but the slip was obvious. Several jurors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "These people?" Washington pressed. "Could you clarify who you mean by these people, Mr. Barrett?" The cross-examination continued, methodically exposing the racial motivations behind Barrett's actions. His testimony grew increasingly defensive and hostile, culminating in an outburst that required the judge to call for order in the court. As the trial progressed, Michael maintained his composure, even as Barrett's testimony devolved into thinly veiled racism and self-justification. The contrast between Michael's controlled response during the incident and Barrett's continuing aggression wasn't lost on the jury. The jury's deliberation lasted just under 3 hours. When they filed back into the courtroom, their faces were serious but resolved. The forewoman stood, her voice clear as she delivered the verdict. "On the charge of assault with hate crime enhancements, we find the defendant guilty." Chapter 5. Resolution. Judge Maria Hernandez looked down from her bench at James Barrett, her expression stern as she prepared to deliver the sentence. The courtroom was packed, with community members, media representatives, and interested parties filling every available seat. Michael sat quietly beside Angela Washington, his posture straight but not rigid, his expression thoughtful. "Mr. Barrett," Judge Hernandez began, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed courtroom, "your actions represent not just an assault on Mr. Jenkins, but an assault on the very principles of civil society. The evidence presented at trial showed not only premeditated violence, but also a disturbing pattern of racist behavior that has no place in our community." She paused, allowing her words to settle before continuing. "This court sentences you to 18 months in state prison, followed by mandatory anger management and diversity awareness training. Additionally, you will pay restitution to Mr. Jenkins for his medical expenses and lost wages." As Barrett was led away by court officers, still protesting his innocence, Michael remained seated, processing the culmination of months of legal proceedings. The victory felt important but somehow incomplete, like winning a battle in a war that showed no signs of ending. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered with cameras and microphones, eager for statements. Michael spoke briefly, choosing his words carefully. "Today's verdict is not about revenge or punishment. It's about establishing that everyone has the right to live their daily lives without fear of harassment or assault. I hope this case sends a message that our community will not tolerate hate-motivated violence." The media coverage in the following days framed the case as a significant moment in the ongoing struggle against racism in everyday life. Opinion pieces discussed the importance of standing up to racial intimidation, while also acknowledging the risks involved in doing so. Local news channels featured interviews with civil rights leaders who contextualized the incident within the broader historical struggle for equality and justice. In the weeks following the trial, Michael found himself processing a complex mix of emotions. The relief of vindication mingled with a deep exhaustion that seemed to seep into his bones. He began seeing Dr. Lisa Martinez, a trauma counselor who specialized in helping victims of hate crimes. In their sessions, they explored not just the immediate impact of the assault, but the cumulative weight of a lifetime of similar, if less violent, encounters. What you're feeling is a normal response to an abnormal situation, Dr. Martinez explained during one session. Your body and mind are processing not just this incident, but every microaggression, every subtle dismissal, every moment of having to be twice as good just to be treated equally. Support came from unexpected quarters. The Thompson's grocery incident had sparked a community conversation about casual racism and bystander intervention. Local organizations began hosting workshops on recognizing and responding to hate incidents. Michael was invited to speak at several of these events, sharing his experience while emphasizing the importance of documentation and staying calm under pressure. The elderly woman from the store, Mrs. Thompson, sent him a handwritten letter expressing her regret at not speaking up sooner during the incident. Your dignity in the face of such hatred has taught me that silence in these moments is its own form of complicity, she wrote. I've joined a local anti-racism group, and though I'm often the oldest person there, I'm learning every day how to be a better ally. Michael's architectural firm took steps to strengthen their diversity and inclusion policies, using his experience as a catalyst for meaningful change. His colleague Sarah Chin organized a series of lunch and learn sessions where employees could discuss their experiences with discrimination and brainstorm ways to create a more inclusive workplace. The case had broader ripple effects throughout the legal system. Angela Washington used it as a precedent in similar cases, demonstrating that with proper documentation and witness cooperation, hate crimes could be successfully prosecuted. The local police department incorporated the security footage into their training programs, using it to illustrate proper response protocols for bias-motivated incidents. Yet Michael remained acutely aware that his case was more exception than rule. For every incident caught on camera, with witnesses willing to testify and a prosecutor ready to pursue justice, countless others went unreported or unpunished. He began working with a local legal aid organization, helping other victims of hate crimes navigate the justice system. During this period, Michael's family provided an unwavering source of support. His wife, Rebecca, a high school history teacher, used the case to discuss civil rights and personal courage with her students. Their teenage children, Marcus and Sophia, processed the event in their own ways, Marcus by joining the school's social justice club, and Sophia by writing a powerful essay about her father's experience that won a statewide competition. The incident also sparked difficult but necessary conversations within their extended family. Rebecca's parents, who had always considered themselves progressive, were forced to confront their own subtle biases and assumptions. These discussions, though sometimes uncomfortable, led to deeper understanding and stronger family bonds. 6 months after the trial, Michael received an unexpected letter. It was from Barrett's 19-year-old daughter, Emily. I want you to know that your response to my father's hatred showed me a different way, she wrote. I've spent my life watching him blame others for his problems, letting anger consume him. Seeing how you handled his attack with such dignity made me realize I don't want to carry his prejudices forward. The letter brought tears to Michael's eyes, not because it erased the trauma of the incident, but because it represented the possibility of change. He shared it with Dr. Martinez in their next session, and they discussed how personal transformation often comes from unexpected sources. As the one-year anniversary of the incident approached, Michael found himself back at Thompson's grocery, standing in the same aisle where everything had happened. The store had changed, and new security cameras with better resolution had been installed, and staff had received enhanced training in handling bias incidents. But more importantly, Michael had changed. He no longer felt the need to shop during off hours to avoid confrontation. The incident had taught him that while racism remained a reality, he had the strength to face it head-on. His controlled response in that moment of crisis had not only protected him physically but had created a ripple effect of positive change in his community. The local bar association honored Michael with their Civic Courage Award, celebrating not just his response to the attack but his ongoing work in helping others stand up to discrimination. In his acceptance speech, he reflected on the broader implications of his experience. Justice isn't just about courtroom victories, he told the assembled crowd. It's about creating a world where no one has to face what I faced that morning. It's about building communities where dignity and respect are the norm, not the exception. And most importantly, it's about having the courage to stand up for these principles, even when doing so comes at a personal cost. The speech resonated beyond the immediate audience. being shared widely on social media and quoted in discussions about community responses to hate crimes. Several law schools incorporated the case into their civil rights curriculum, using it to illustrate both the legal and human aspects of prosecuting bias-motivated crimes. As Michael continued his work with the legal aid organization, he began to see how his experience could serve as a template for others facing similar situations. He developed a checklist for documenting bias incidents, emphasizing the importance of remaining calm, gathering evidence, and building a support network. The community's response to the incident also evolved over time. What had started as shock and outrage transformed into sustained commitment to addressing systemic racism. Local businesses implemented bias training programs, community organizations developed rapid response networks for hate incidents, and the city council passed stronger anti-discrimination ordinances. Rebecca noticed changes in their neighborhood as well. Neighbors who had previously kept their distance began reaching out, organizing block parties and community events that celebrated the area's diversity. Their children's school initiated a Stand Up to Hate program, encouraging students to intervene safely when they witnessed bullying or discrimination. Yet Michael remained realistic about the challenges ahead. During his speaking engagements, he always emphasized that his case represented both progress and the continuing need for vigilance. Change happens person by person, moment by moment, he would say. Each time we stand up to hatred, we create space for understanding to grow. The incident at Thompson's grocery had lasted less than 15 minutes, but its impact continued to ripple outward, touching lives and changing perspectives in ways Michael could never have anticipated. It served as a reminder that sometimes the most powerful responses to hate are not dramatic confrontations but steady, dignified resistance backed by community support and legal action. As Michael looked toward the future, he carried with him the lessons of that morning, the importance of preparation, the power of documentation, and the truth that justice, while not always swift, becomes possible when people stand together against hatred. His story became not just a personal triumph but a blueprint for others facing similar challenges, proving that one person's courage could inspire a community to change. His story became not just a personal triumph but a blueprint for others facing similar challenges, proving that one person's courage could inspire a community to change. Throughout the following years, Michael's experience continued to serve as a catalyst for broader social transformation, reaching far beyond the confines of his local community. Universities began incorporating the case study into their sociology and law curricula, analyzing not just the legal proceedings but the societal implications of standing up to racial intimidation. Dr. Sarah Martinez, a professor at State University, developed an entire course around modern civil rights responses, using Michael's case as a central example of effective documentation and community mobilization. The ripple effects extended into corporate America as well. Companies seeking to improve their diversity and inclusion practices reached out to Michael for consultation. He partnered with his architectural firm to develop comprehensive training programs that went beyond superficial sensitivity training, focusing instead on creating concrete action plans for responding to and preventing discrimination in the workplace. Michael's children grew into powerful advocates in their own right. Micus, now in college, founded a student organization dedicated to documenting and addressing bias incidents on campus. Sophia, pursuing a law degree, focused her studies on civil rights legislation, inspired by watching Angela Washington's skillful prosecution of her father's case. The Thompson's grocery incident became a case study in effective community response. Other cities sent delegations to study how the local police department, businesses, and community organizations had worked together to create a comprehensive anti-hate infrastructure. The model was replicated in various forms across the country, adapted to meet the needs of different communities while maintaining the core principles of documentation, support, and accountability. Rebecca's curriculum on civil rights expanded to include modern-day examples alongside historical ones, helping students understand that the struggle for equality wasn't just a chapter in history books, but an ongoing process that required active participation. Her students often expressed surprise at how a seemingly simple incident in a grocery store could illuminate so many aspects of contemporary social justice work. The legal precedent set by the case continued to influence jurisprudence. Prosecutors in similar cases cited the Thompson's grocery incident as an example of how to effectively present evidence of bias motivation. The detailed documentation, from security footage to witness statements, became a template for building strong hate crime cases. Emily Barrett, James Barrett's daughter, became an unexpected ally in the fight against racism. After her initial letter to Michael, she began speaking at schools and community centers about the importance of challenging inherited prejudices. Her testimony about growing up in a household dominated by racial hatred and her journey toward understanding and acceptance provided powerful insights into how bigotry is perpetuated and how it can be overcome. Local businesses, inspired by Thompson's Grocery's response to the incident, formed a coalition dedicated to creating safe and welcoming spaces for all community members. They developed protocols for handling bias incidents, installed better security systems, and trained their staff in de-escalation techniques. The initiative spread to neighboring cities, creating a network of businesses committed to actively opposing discrimination. Michael's work with the legal aid organization expanded to include preventive measures. They established a hotline for reporting bias incidents, created Know Your Rights workshops, and developed partnerships with pro bono attorneys willing to take on discrimination cases. The organization became a model for similar initiatives across the state, demonstrating how legal resources could be effectively mobilized to support marginalized communities. The annual Civic Courage Awards ceremony, where Michael had first shared his story, evolved into a major event celebrating individuals who stood up to discrimination in their communities. The awards now included categories for youth activism, business leadership, and community organization, recognizing that confronting racism required effort on multiple fronts. Dr. Lisa Martinez, the trauma counselor who had helped Michael process his experience, developed new therapeutic approaches for working with victims of hate crimes. Her methods, which combined individual counseling with community support networks, gained recognition in the mental health field as an effective way to address both personal trauma and systemic racism. The security footage from that morning became more than just evidence in a criminal case. With proper permissions and context, it was used in training sessions for law enforcement, security personnel, and community organizations, demonstrating both the reality of racial harassment and the importance of appropriate response protocols. Rebecca noticed that their neighborhood continued to evolve in positive ways. The community meetings that had started in response to the incident became regular gatherings where neighbors discussed local issues, celebrated diversity, and planned collective actions to improve their shared space. These meetings spawned various initiatives, from youth mentoring programs to cultural exchange events. The impact on local politics was equally significant. Community members, energized by the successful prosecution of the Thompson's Grocery case, became more involved in local government. They advocated for stronger anti-discrimination ordinances, better oversight of law enforcement, and increased funding for community-based anti-racism initiatives. As Michael approached retirement from his architectural firm, he found himself increasingly focused on mentoring the next generation of civil rights advocates. He worked with law students, community organizers, and young professionals, sharing not just the technical aspects of documenting and responding to discrimination, but also the emotional wisdom gained from his experience. The Thompson's Grocery incident, which had begun as a moment of confrontation in a quiet store aisle, had transformed into a continuing lesson in community resilience and social change. It demonstrated that while racism remained a persistent challenge, coordinated response and sustained commitment could create meaningful transformation. Looking back, Michael realized that the most significant impact of his experience wasn't the legal victory or the policy changes, but the way it had shown people that standing up to racism wasn't just about dramatic confrontations. It was about steady, principled resistance, supported by community solidarity and institutional change. As new challenges emerged and social justice work evolved, the lessons from that morning continued to resonate. Each time someone stood up to discrimination, each time a community rallied to support victims of hate, each time institutions took meaningful steps toward equity, the ripple effects of that grocery store confrontation continued to spread, contributing to the ongoing work of building a more just and equitable society. The story of Michael Jenkins and the Thompson's Grocery incident became part of a larger narrative about courage, community, and change. It served as a reminder that while the path to justice might be long and complex, each step forward, no matter how small it might seem in the moment, contributed to the broader journey toward equality and human dignity. The story of Michael Jenkins and the Thompson's Grocery incident became part of a larger narrative about courage, community, and change. It served as a reminder that while the path to justice might be long and complex, each step forward, no matter how small it might seem in the moment, contributed to the broader journey toward equality and human dignity. As years passed, this truth only became more evident as new generations discovered and drew inspiration from the incident. 10 years after the confrontation, Michael found himself sitting in a crowded auditorium at State University, watching his granddaughter, Amara, defend her doctoral dissertation on modern civil rights movements. Her research had been partially inspired by her grandfather's experience, examining how individual acts of resistance could catalyze broader social change. The dissertation committee included scholars from around the country, all interested in her unique perspective on grassroots activism and institutional transformation. The Thompson's grocery building itself had become something of a landmark. When the original owners decided to retire, the community rallied to purchase the property and transform it into a community center focused on social justice and reconciliation. The aisle where the confrontation had taken place now housed an interactive exhibition on the history of civil rights in the area, from early struggles to contemporary challenges. Michael's original checklist for documenting bias incidents had evolved into a comprehensive mobile application, developed by a team of tech activists who had been inspired by his story. The app, available in multiple languages, helped users record incidents, connect with legal resources, and find support within their communities. It had been downloaded millions of times and was being used across the globe. The annual community gatherings that had grown out of the incident expanded into a regional social justice conference, drawing participants from neighboring states. Workshops covered everything from legal advocacy to community organizing, with a particular focus on practical strategies for confronting discrimination in everyday life. Michael often gave the keynote address, sharing how a single morning in a grocery store had sparked decades of positive change. Rebecca's curriculum had been adopted by school districts across the country, helping students understand the connection between historical civil rights movements and contemporary struggles for justice. Her approach, which emphasized personal agency and community responsibility, resonated with young people looking to make a difference in their own communities. Emily Barrett's journey from the daughter of a convicted racist to a prominent anti-racism educator became the subject of a documentary film. The film explored how confronting prejudice within one's own family could contribute to broader social transformation. Michael appeared in the film, sharing his perspective on forgiveness and the possibility of change. The legal precedent established by the case continued to evolve. Courts across the country cited it when handling similar cases, particularly in situations where clear documentation and community support played crucial roles. Law schools used it to teach students about the intersection of criminal law, civil rights, and community advocacy. Dr. Lisa Martinez's therapeutic approach had developed into a recognized school of trauma treatment, particularly effective for individuals and communities dealing with the effects of racial discrimination. Training centers were established in major cities, ensuring that her methods could reach those who needed them most. The security industry underwent significant changes, partly influenced by the Thompson's grocery incident. New standards were developed for documenting and responding to bias incidents, with emphasis on both technological solutions and human intervention. Security personnel received enhanced training in recognizing and de-escalating potentially discriminatory situations. Michael's architectural firm had become a leader in designing spaces that promoted inclusion and community connection. Their projects incorporated features that enhanced safety and accessibility while creating opportunities for positive social interaction. The firm's approach influenced industry standards, demonstrating how thoughtful design could contribute to social justice. The neighborhood around Thompson's Grocery transformed into a model of community integration. Regular cultural festivals celebrated the area's diversity, while community councils ensured that all voices were heard in local decision-making. Property values rose as people were attracted to the area's reputation for safety and inclusion. Sophia Jenkins, now a civil rights attorney, established a legal clinic specializing in hate crime cases. The clinic, staffed primarily by young lawyers of color, provided pro bono representation to victims while training the next generation of civil rights advocates. They maintained a wall of inspiration cases, with the Thompson's Grocery incident prominently featured. Marcus Jenkins developed the consulting firm that helped organizations implement effective anti-discrimination policies. His approach, which combined data analysis with personal narrative, helped companies understand both the business and human aspects of creating inclusive environments. His firm's client list included Fortune 500 companies and government agencies. The Civic Courage Award expanded into a national recognition program, identifying and supporting individuals and organizations working to combat discrimination in their communities. The program included grants for innovative anti-racism initiatives, ensuring that recognition was accompanied by practical support. Local politics continued to evolve, with new leaders emerging from the community activism sparked by the incident. They brought fresh perspectives to government, prioritizing equity and inclusion in policy decisions. The city became known as a leader in progressive governance, particularly in areas related to civil rights and social justice. Academic research into the long-term effects of the Thompson's Grocery incident revealed how single events could trigger lasting social change. Studies documented the ripple effects through multiple spheres: legal, educational, social, and economic, demonstrating the interconnected nature of social justice work. The training programs developed in response to the incident were adapted for use in different contexts: schools, workplaces, government agencies, and community organizations. They emphasized practical skills while maintaining focus on the human aspects of confronting discrimination. International organizations began studying the Thompson's Grocery case as an example of effective community response to hate incidents. Delegations from other countries visited to learn how local institutions had cooperated to create lasting change. The model was adapted for use in different cultural contexts while maintaining its core principles. As Michael entered his later years, he found deep satisfaction in seeing how the ripples from that morning continued to spread. Each new generation brought fresh energy and insights to the work of building a more just society. The story remained relevant because it spoke to fundamental truths about human dignity and the power of principled resistance. The transformation that had begun in a grocery store aisle had touched countless lives, demonstrating how individual courage, community support, and institutional change could work together to create lasting social transformation. It stood as a testament to the possibility of progress, even in the face of deeply entrenched prejudice. Yet Michael remained aware that the work was ongoing. New challenges emerged as society evolved, requiring fresh approaches and renewed commitment. The lessons from Thompson's Grocery about documentation, community solidarity, and persistent advocacy continued to inform responses to these challenges. The story endured because it offered both hope and practical guidance. It showed that while confronting racism required courage, it also required strategy, support, and sustained effort. Most importantly, it demonstrated that positive change was possible when people stood together against injustice. As future generations continued to build on this legacy, the Thompson's Grocery incident remained a touchstone, reminding people that the journey toward justice was made up of countless individual choices to stand up for what was right. In this way, the story became part of the endless narrative of human progress, each chapter building on those that came before while pointing the way toward a more equitable future.